Officer Daniels had done this 100 times before. A lone black woman on an empty stretch of highway, no witnesses, no backup for her, just him and his authority. He knew exactly how this would go. She would argue, claim to know her rights, but in the end, she would comply. They always did. But Angela Carter wasn't like the others. He saw a civilian. He didn't see the U.S. Army colonel trained to lead, to fight, to win. He didn't know the discipline, the strength, the unshakable resolve forged in war zones and high-stakes operations. He didn't realize that every order he barked, every attempt to assert control, was pulling him deeper into his own downfall. And when he pushed too far, when he reached for power that was never truly his, he didn't just pick the wrong target. He started the fight that would end everything for him. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The evening sun cast golden streaks across the quiet stretch of highway as Colonel Angela Carter guided her SUV toward home. The hum of the tires against the pavement was steady, a soothing rhythm after a long day at a military function honoring veterans. She was dressed in civilian clothes, navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, neatly pressed slacks. Her military uniform was folded inside the garment bag on the passenger seat, the ribbons and insignia that marked her rank safely tucked away. A glance at the rearview mirror showed flashing red and blue lights approaching fast. Her brows furrowed. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't swerved, hadn't broken a single law. Yet, as she checked again, the patrol car remained behind her, signaling for her to pull over. Angela sighed and steered onto the shoulder. Years of experience told her to stay calm, to handle this with control and patience, but something gnawed at her. There was no reason for this stop. She knew it. The officer approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. He was broad-shouldered with a stiff posture, his badge gleaming under the fading light. The moment he reached her window, she caught the look in his eye. Not curiosity, not professionalism, just that thinly veiled condescension she'd encountered too many times before. "License and registration," he ordered, his tone clipped. Angela kept her movements deliberate as she retrieved her wallet, passing over her driver's license. "Is there a problem, officer?" He barely glanced at it before flicking his gaze back to her. His eyes roamed her face, then her hands, like he was waiting for her to make the wrong move. "Step out of the vehicle." Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Excuse me?" "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, slower this time, daring her to question him. Angela exhaled slowly. "May I ask why I'm being stopped? I wasn't speeding, I wasn't swerving, and I'm well within my lane. What exactly is the reason for this?" The officer gave a smirk, the kind that didn't belong in a routine traffic stop. "Suspicious activity. Step out now." She had seen this before, knew exactly what this was. But she also knew better than to escalate things on the side of a desolate road. With measured patience, she pushed open her door and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. The officer circled her SUV, peering inside before turning his attention back to her. "Where are you headed?" "Home," Angela answered. "I just left a military function." His gaze narrowed slightly. "Military, huh?" A chuckle. "And what exactly are you claiming to be?" Angela lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. "I'm Colonel Angela Carter, United States Army." A beat of silence, then a scoff. He looked her over again, slower this time, as if he were reevaluating everything she'd just said. The smirk on his face widened, like he had caught her in a lie. "Oh, really? Colonel?" He dragged the word out, the skepticism thick. "You sure about that?" Angela's jaw tightened. "Yes," he let out a small laugh. "And where's your military ID, Colonel?" Angela reached into her blazer pocket. Nothing. Her brows furrowed slightly as she patted the other side, then smoothly pulled out her wallet. She flipped through it, searching the compartments, but came up empty. Her mind raced. She always carried her ID. It was second nature. Had she left it in the car? No. She would have put it somewhere secure. She checked the inner pocket of her blazer again, but still nothing. Then it clicked. The last time she had handled it was before the event, when she had changed out of her uniform. her uniform that was still in her locker at base. She met the officer's gaze. "I don't have my military ID on me, but—" "Uh-huh," he interrupted, his smirk growing. "How convenient." He turned her driver's license over in his hand, tapping it against his palm. "No veteran status either." "That's funny, huh? A whole colonel like you. No proof of it?" Angela refused to let frustration show. "This is my vehicle. My registration is in the glove compartment. You're welcome to check it." "Oh, I'll be checking more than that," he said, already stepping past her toward the car. She turned sharply. "You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle." His smirk deepened. "Suspicious behavior is enough for me. And I gotta say, you're acting real nervous, ma'am." The way he said it, dripping in condescension, made it clear he wasn't offering respect. Angela clenched her jaw. She had seen men like him before. Officers who believed their badge gave them the right to harass people like her. She knew she had two choices: argue and escalate, or step back and play a different hand. And Angela Carter never played a losing game. Because the moment he crossed the line, and she knew he would, she'd be ready. Angela's breath remained steady, but her pulse quickened as she mentally retraced her steps. Her military ID wasn't in her blazer. It wasn't in her wallet. Then it hit her. She had left it in her uniform pocket, back at the base locker. Her gaze flicked toward Daniels, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her. Not like an officer ensuring compliance, but like a man waiting for her to fail. She straightened, adjusting her blazer. "As I said, I'm Colonel Angela Carter, United States Army. My ID is in my uniform, which is currently secured at my base locker." Daniels let out a slow, exaggerated whistle, shaking his head. "That's so. You expect me to just take your word for it? It's the truth. And yet," he mused, holding her license between two fingers, flipping it over lazily, "I don't see Colonel written anywhere on this. No veteran status, no military rank, not even a hint that you ever wore a uniform." He clicked his tongue. "You'd think a real soldier would make sure people knew." Angela didn't take the bait. She had encountered men like Daniels before, officers who wielded authority like a weapon, who took one look at her skin, at her face, and decided she didn't belong. This wasn't about her credentials. It was about control. "Your department should have a database," she said calmly. "Run my name. You'll see my record." Daniels let out a low chuckle. "Oh, I could, but I don't feel like it. See? I like to do things the old-fashioned way." His smile sharpened. "So how about this? Step out of the car." Angela's eyes narrowed. "I already complied when you asked me to stop. Now you're escalating for no reason." "Ma'am," Daniels said, mock patience dripping from his voice, "I asked nicely. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Angela didn't move. "I'm not stepping out unless you give me a lawful reason." Daniels's smirk faded, replaced by something colder. "You're refusing an officer's order?" "I'm refusing an unlawful request," she corrected, her voice measured. "You have no probable cause to search my vehicle, and you certainly have no reason to detain me." Daniels let out a long, exaggerated sigh and tapped his fingers against his belt. "See? Now this is where things get messy. A driver refusing a lawful command from law enforcement? That sounds like resisting. And resisting?" He clucked his tongue. "That gets ugly real fast." Angela kept her stance firm, but she felt the shift. He was done playing. He wanted to push her, to make her react, to justify whatever he had already decided to do. "You wouldn't be threatening to arrest me now, would you?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Daniels leaned in slightly, voice just low enough to feign concern, just loud enough to carry the weight of a warning. "I'm saying, Colonel, if that's what you really are, that refusing a direct order from law enforcement never ends well. And between you and me," his lips curled upward, "I don't think you're special enough to get an exception." Angela knew what he was trying to do. She had trained soldiers on psychological tactics, on how to manipulate an opponent into making a mistake. He wanted her to react, to give him a reason to escalate. She wouldn't give it to him. Instead, she met his gaze, unwavering. "I know my rights, Officer Daniels, and I know what you're doing. So either arrest me or let me go." The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken tension. Daniels had expected compliance, expected intimidation to do its job. But Angela wasn't afraid of him, and that infuriated him. His hand flexed at his side, hovering over his radio. His jaw tightened as he took a step closer, lowering his voice into something colder. "Have it your way." Angela remained still, refusing to back down. Daniels exhaled sharply. "You're under arrest." Angela remained still, her breath steady as Daniels stared her down, waiting for her to react. When she didn't flinch, didn't move, his lip curled slightly, annoyance flickering in his eyes. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for his radio. "Dispatch. I've got a possible 1029. Send backup to my location." His voice was smug, each word measured. Angela knew exactly what he was doing. 1029. Wanted person. He was deliberately escalating, setting the stage before even verifying anything. She exhaled slowly. "You're making a mistake, Officer Daniels." Daniels clipped his radio back to his belt, giving her a slow, mocking smirk. "Is that so? Because last I checked, refusing to comply with law enforcement is a mistake." He nodded toward her SUV. "Now, step aside." Angela didn't move. "You don't have probable cause to search my vehicle." Daniels took a step closer, lowering his voice like he was offering her a last chance. "And yet, I'm gonna search it anyway." Angela's jaw tightened. "That would be an illegal search." Daniels shrugged. "You seem real concerned about the law all of a sudden. If there's nothing in there, then you've got nothing to worry about." Before she could say another word, he turned and yanked open the driver's side door. Angela clenched her fists at her sides, forcing herself to remain still. Reacting would give him what he wanted, a reason to escalate further. Daniels leaned inside, rifling through the center console before popping open the glove compartment. Papers and personal items were tossed onto the seat without care. His movements were deliberate, reckless, as if he was determined to find something, anything, that would justify his actions. "Got yourself a little business running out of this car, Colonel?" he muttered, shoving through her things. "Smuggling something? Maybe stolen military property?" Angela let out a slow breath. "You're crossing a line." Daniels barely spared her a glance. "Lady, I don't see a line." He moved to the passenger side, throwing open the door and tearing through the compartments, flipping open her purse, tossing out items onto the seat. Angela refused to react. Instead, she reached into her pocket, feeling the smooth surface of her phone against her fingertips. She knew exactly who to call. Without a word, she turned slightly, angling away from Daniels, and discreetly scrolled through her contacts. Then, with a calm expression, she pressed the call button and lifted the device to her ear. She didn't need to say much. "This is Colonel Carter," she said smoothly. "I need a favor, right now." Daniels was too busy tearing through her belongings to notice that the game had already changed. Daniels's frustration grew with every passing second. He had expected to find something, anything, that would justify his gut feeling, something to prove that this woman wasn't who she claimed to be. But the more he dug through Angela's belongings, the less he found. His hands tore through the glove compartment, the center console even under the seats, tossing her personal items carelessly onto the floor. Angela stood just a few feet away, still as a statue, watching, waiting. Her silence only made Daniels angrier. He slammed the passenger door shut, turning to her with a sneer. "Where is it?" Angela blinked. "Where is what?" Daniels let out a sharp breath, gesturing toward the mess he had made of her car. "Whatever you're hiding. Fake credentials? Stolen goods? Drugs?" He stopped himself, realizing how ridiculous he sounded. Angela didn't move, didn't speak, and that infuriated him. "You think this is a joke?" He stepped closer, voice lowering into something sharper. "You think because you act calm, I'm just supposed to let this go?" Angela lifted her chin slightly, her expression unreadable. "Are you finished?" Daniels scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, we're just getting started." He pulled out his radio, pressing the button with more force than necessary. "Dispatch. I need K9 support for a full vehicle sweep. Possible narcotics or smuggled goods." Then, His radio crackled. An incoming call. Unit 13, hold all further action. You have an urgent call coming through from command. Patch in immediately. Daniels frowned. Command? He hadn't called anyone above his shift supervisor. Still gripping his radio, he stepped a few paces away and switched frequencies. This is Officer Daniels. Go ahead. There was a beat of silence. Then a voice. Sharp, authoritative, and furious. Officer Daniels? This is Captain Reynolds. What the hell do you think you're doing? Daniels stiffened. Captain? From HQ? His mouth opened, but no words came out. Are you deaf? Reynolds snapped. You are unlawfully detaining Colonel Angela Carter, a highly decorated officer of the United States Army. You will immediately cease your actions, stand down, and escort her to the station for a formal apology. Now. Daniels swallowed. His fingers twitched over the radio. Sir, You what? You ignored protocol? You illegally searched her vehicle? You harassed a senior officer like some backwater rookie with a power trip? Angela remained where she was, expression calm, posture unshaken. Daniels's gaze snapped to her, his blood boiling. This wasn't right. How did they know? The weight of his mistake slammed into him like a freight train. The radio crackled again. You're wasting time, Daniels. Get in your car, drive her to the station, and report to my office the second you arrive. You better pray I don't have your badge by the end of the day. The line went dead. Daniels stood frozen, his grip tightening around the radio, humiliation scorching through him. Angela stepped forward, smooth, effortless. She met his gaze with the same unshakable calm she had maintained all along. Are you finished? She asked again, voice steady. Daniels's jaw clenched so hard it ached. He had no choice. Wordlessly, he stalked toward his patrol car and yanked open the door. He didn't look at her as he ground out, "Get in." Angela exhaled, stepping toward her own car. She calmly picked up her belongings, returning them to their proper places before shutting the door behind her. Then, with the same measured pace, she walked toward the patrol car. She slid into the back seat, not as a suspect, not as a criminal, but as the person in complete control. Daniels slammed his door, white-knuckling the steering wheel. His foot jammed onto the gas, the tires screeching against the pavement as they pulled away from the shoulder. Angela settled in, gaze forward, voice level. "Drive safe, officer." Daniels gritted his teeth so hard he swore he tasted blood. The drive to the station was silent, aside from the tense hum of the patrol car's engine. Daniels gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles were bone white. His jaw locked so hard it ached. Angela sat in the back, calm, composed, and unbothered. She had won, and he knew it. When they pulled into the station lot, Daniels barely waited for the engine to settle before throwing the car into park. Without a word, he yanked the door open and climbed out, his movements stiff with barely restrained frustration. Angela followed at her own pace, stepping out with measured ease. Inside, the air shifted the moment they walked through the doors. The entire precinct knew. Officers at their desks stole glances, some exchanging low whispers. Others avoided looking at Daniels entirely. The front desk sergeant barely raised his eyes before pressing the intercom. "She's here." Angela caught the way Daniels's shoulders tensed. He knew what was coming. A few seconds later, the police chief emerged from his office, a graying man with a squared jaw and a no-nonsense stare that cut across the room like a blade. Chief Warren Mitchell. Angela had dealt with men like him before. Old-school law enforcement, sharp but politically aware. He took in the scene quickly, Angela standing tall, Daniel stiff and silent beside her. His expression darkened. "Colonel Carter," Mitchell greeted, voice clipped but respectful. He turned to Daniels. "My office, now." Daniels hesitated for a split second, just enough for the chief's brow to twitch in warning, before stiffly marching past Angela toward the office. Angela followed, unhurried. Once inside, Mitchell shut the door with a sharp click. The air was thick with tension. Daniels stood at attention, but his fingers twitched at his sides, his frustration barely contained. Angela took her seat, crossing one leg over the other. The chief turned his glare on Daniels first. "I want to know what in the hell made you think detaining a United States Army colonel was a good idea?" Daniels's jaw tightened. "Sir, she refused to comply. She didn't have ID on her, no veteran status on her license. How was I supposed to know she wasn't lying?" Mitchell's stare hardened. "You know how? Because you should have run her name. Because you should have followed protocol. Because instead of doing your damn job, you decided to harass someone who outranks you in every possible way." Daniels didn't move, but Angela could see the rage simmering beneath his skin. "Sir, save it." Mitchell leaned forward, voice lowering. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess I'm cleaning up right now? The Pentagon called me." "The Pentagon? You've just embarrassed this entire department." Daniels's lips pressed into a thin line, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Angela watched, silent, not needing to say a single word. Mitchell sighed, then turned to Angela. "Colonel Carter, I'd like to formally apologize for this department's failure today. This should never have happened." Angela nodded, accepting it but not letting it soften the moment. "I expect to see procedural changes to prevent this from happening again, Chief." Mitchell gave a firm nod. "Understood." Then he turned to Daniels. "Apologize. Now." Daniels froze, his fists clenched, his nostrils flared, but he had no choice. He slowly turned toward Angela, barely keeping his voice even. "I apologize." Angela tilted her head slightly. "For what?" Daniels's jaw twitched. He knew what she was doing, and he hated it. "I apologize," he bit out. "Colonel, for the inconvenience." Mitchell's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Try again." Daniels swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. "I apologize for my actions today. I was wrong." The words sounded poisonous coming from him. "It won't happen again." Angela watched him carefully. The words were there. The meaning wasn't. She didn't need it to be. She had already won. Mitchell exhaled sharply. "Effective immediately, Officer Daniels. You are suspended pending review. If I had my way, I'd have your badge tonight." He narrowed his gaze. "You're lucky I don't." Daniels flinched at that. Humiliation settled deep in his bones. Angela stood, smoothing out her blazer. "I appreciate your cooperation, Chief." Angela turned her gaze to him, watching the way he shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his failure. "You set me up," he muttered under his breath. Angela lifted a brow. "I didn't have to." Daniel's nostrils flared, his rage barely contained. He had lost control, lost power, and it infuriated him. Angela tilted her head slightly. "I told you. You were making a mistake." Mitchell's gaze snapped to Daniels. "I don't want to hear another damn word from you right now." Daniels shut his mouth, but the look in his eyes was clear. This wasn't over. Angela knew men like him. He wouldn't let this go. And that meant she would have to be ready. The next morning, Angela slid into the driver's seat of her SUV, exhaling as she adjusted her rearview mirror, taking a moment to observe the stillness of the road ahead. The air was crisp, the sun barely beginning its ascent, casting long shadows across the highway as the quiet hum of early morning life settled around her. Though the world around her seemed calm, she was not the type to let the surface dictate her reality. There was always something beneath it, something waiting to be seen, and she had spent her life learning how to recognize it before it revealed itself. She wasn't tense, but she wasn't relaxed either. After years in the military, she had learned one simple truth. When a man like Daniels gets humiliated, he doesn't let it go. Some men understood failure, took it as a lesson, moved forward with the understanding that life continued whether they liked it or not. Others, men like Daniels, let it consume them, let it burrow beneath their skin, feeding off the anger and resentment that festered inside them. His failure wasn't something he could accept. He had lost something he never thought would be taken from him: his authority, his control, his ability to intimidate and command obedience without question. And men like him didn't just let that go. They found ways to take it back. She had seen it before. The way he clenched his jaw so tightly it seemed like his teeth might crack. the way his hands curled into fists at his sides, the way his entire body radiated a silent fury he barely kept restrained. He hadn't been sorry for what he did. He had been sorry that he had lost. The thought of changing her routine had barely lasted a moment. She had dismissed it almost as quickly as it had crossed her mind. Avoiding a road, altering her own life, making accommodations for a man who had already tried to control her once and failed, was out of the question. The only thing avoiding him would accomplish was giving him the satisfaction of knowing he had dictated something about her actions, and she refused to allow that. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not start acting as though she had. So she took the same route, her movements natural, her mind alert but unbothered. The highway stretched ahead, quiet, mostly empty save for the occasional truck or early commuter. The gentle hum of the tires against the pavement filled the space around her, the distant horizon stretching wide and uninterrupted. She remained steady, her grip on the wheel relaxed, her breathing even, her eyes taking in everything without looking like she was searching for something. And then she saw it. The dark-colored sedan appeared in her rearview mirror, moving into her lane in a way that didn't immediately signal alarm, yet set off a quiet awareness in the back of her mind. It had been a few cars back moments ago, blending into the early morning traffic without drawing attention, but now it was closing the distance with a purpose that made her straighten slightly in her seat. She didn't react outwardly, didn't make any sudden adjustments that would indicate she had taken notice, but she was watching. The sedan wasn't tailgating, wasn't attempting to pass, wasn't adjusting its speed to the natural ebb and flow of traffic. It was just following, lingering. Angela exhaled slowly, keeping her posture casual, her grip steady, but her mind focused. If this was a coincidence, if this was just another commuter on the road heading in the same direction, the car would either change lanes or pass her in the next few moments. But it didn't. Instead, it crept closer. Her fingers flexed over the steering wheel, not in nervousness but in calculation. It was too deliberate. A normal driver wouldn't hold a position in someone's blind spot for this long, wouldn't drift forward with such measured precision without signaling an intent to overtake or move aside. Then, without warning, the sedan accelerated. It wasn't a casual increase in speed, wasn't a gradual push of the gas pedal as a driver settled into their rhythm. It was deliberate, sharp, a lunge forward meant to close the distance too fast, too aggressively. Angela felt it before it even fully happened. Her body had already braced before her mind confirmed the threat, instincts firing in perfect alignment with reality. Because she knew this wasn't an impatient driver, this wasn't a mistake. This was an attack. Her gaze flicked to the side mirror, and in the briefest moment, her eyes locked onto the driver, Daniels. Out of uniform, his face twisted in pure, unfiltered rage, his hands gripping the wheel with the kind of force that spoke of barely contained fury. There was no calculated restraint this time, no manufactured authority behind a badge, no thin veil of professionalism to hide behind. There was only anger, only a man who had lost control of his life and had decided the only way to regain it was to take control of hers. Angela inhaled through her nose, her pulse steady, her mind already working through the variables. He had nothing left to lose now. That made him dangerous, but it also made him reckless. He edged closer, the sedan pressing into her space, trying to force her toward the shoulder, trying to box her in before she had a chance to respond. She didn't react in fear. She didn't slam the brakes, didn't jerk the wheel, didn't give him the panic he was expecting, the loss of control he was counting on. Instead, she let the SUV drift just slightly, just enough to sell the illusion that she was reacting purely on instinct. She watched as he took the bait. The moment he pushed forward to cut her off, she flicked her turn signal, the small, seemingly automatic movement designed to make him believe he had trapped her. Daniels lunged for the gap, moving in to force her into a mistake. And that was his mistake. At the very last second, she cut the wheel sharply in the opposite direction, breaking his trajectory entirely. His tires screeched against the pavement as he overcorrected, jerking the wheel too hard in his desperation to recover. Angela remained smooth, controlled, watching the way his face contorted in frustration, the realization beginning to dawn on him that she wasn't going to panic, wasn't going to break under the pressure, wasn't going to make it easy for him. But Daniels wasn't finished. He adjusted quickly, pushing forward again, more erratic now, more aggressive, his car veering toward her with reckless determination. The chase stretched onward, their vehicles weaving in a dangerous battle of control, the landscape shifting as the open highway gave way to a more desolate stretch of road, an empty span of pavement where no other cars remained. Angela knew it the second they had crossed the last exit sign, the moment the road stretched wide and barren. Daniels had led her here on purpose, and she had followed willingly. Up ahead, the highway curved, narrowing into a remote stretch lined with nothing but trees and empty space. Daniels slowed, his car easing toward the middle of the road, forcing the moment to a standstill. Angela eased off the gas, fingers flexing on the wheel, breathing even. The road ahead stretched empty, devoid of traffic or any passing witnesses, leaving only the two of them in the vast, desolate space. She had known this moment was inevitable, and now that it had arrived, there was nothing left to do but finish what had already begun. Angela slowed her SUV to a controlled stop, her hands steady on the wheel as she surveyed the isolated stretch of road before her. The trees loomed tall on either side, casting long shadows over the pavement, the thick silence settling between the two vehicles like a living thing. The moment her tires came to a halt, she exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders once, feeling the tension gather like a storm waiting to break. In front of her, Daniels threw his sedan into park with such force that the tires screeched against the asphalt. Before the car had even fully settled, his door flew open, and he stormed out, his movements sharp, his fury bleeding into every step. Angela watched, her gaze calm, unreadable, as he slammed the door behind him and advanced toward her, his posture rigid with barely restrained rage. "You think you're clever, don't you?" His voice carried across the empty road, edged with something venomous, something raw. "You think this little game of yours means you've won?" Angela didn't move immediately. Instead, she took a moment, assessing him, taking in the way his fists clenched at his sides, the way his chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, the way his jaw twitched like he was barely holding himself together. He was unraveling, and she had seen it coming from the moment she had left that police station. Finally, with deliberate ease, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The world around them was still, the emptiness of the road amplifying the tension crackling between them. She closed the door behind her, meeting his stare with the same composed intensity she had held since the moment this all started. "If I remember correctly," she said, her voice measured, "you were the one chasing me." Daniels let out a sharp, humorless laugh, running a hand over his face before dropping it with a hard exhale. "Chasing you? Is that what you call this?" He took a step forward, eyes blazing. "I call it fixing a mistake." Angela arched a brow, tilting her head slightly. "And what mistake would that be?" Daniels's teeth clenched, his entire body rigid. "Letting you walk away like you won. Letting you embarrass me. Letting you think you could pull the kind of stunt you did and not pay for it." He took another step closer, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "You think you humiliated me back at that station? You think you made me look weak?" Angela held her ground, her gaze steady. "You did that all on your own." His face darkened, his expression twisting into something uglier. "You don't get it, do you? You don't get how people like you don't just get to walk around acting untouchable, like you can just challenge authority and get away with it. You think because you had your little phone call, because you got the right people involved, that it makes you better than me?" Angela inhaled slowly, keeping her tone even. No, I think following the law makes me better than you. Daniels's nostrils flared, his body tensing like a coiled spring. You think that badge meant something to me? You think I needed it to put you in your place? Angela tilted her head, studying him, her gaze sharp, unwavering. No, but it was the only thing keeping you from making a real mistake. And now that it's gone, you're spiraling. Daniels let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. You think I'm spiraling? Lady, you have no idea how much restraint I've been showing. His hands flexed at his sides, his fingers twitching like they were itching to do something more. I've had to listen to people talk about how I screwed up. I've had to watch them whisper behind my back. Look at me like I was the problem when all I was doing was my job. And you, he pointed at her, his hand trembling with the weight of his anger. You sit there acting so damn smug, like you're untouchable, like you're better than me. You think you can just keep pushing, keep playing these little games, and walk away without consequences? Angela's expression remained unreadable. This isn't a game, Daniels. It never was. You lost because you were wrong. And instead of facing that, you decided to blame me for it. Daniels took another step forward, closing the distance between them, his voice sharp and bitter. And you decided to play the victim, right? Poor little Colonel. Being harassed by the big bad cop. Making sure everyone sees you as the hero in this story. You got exactly what you wanted. Angela exhaled, the weight of his words rolling off her like water over stone. If I got what I wanted, you wouldn't be standing here right now. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Something close to realization. Close to understanding just how far he had taken this, but it vanished just as quickly. Swallowed by his pride, his hate, his absolute refusal to accept reality. You don't get to decide how this ends, he growled. Angela squared her shoulders, keeping her voice calm, deliberate. No, but you do. You can walk away right now, get in your car, and drive off before you do something you can't come back from. Daniels's breath was uneven, his chest rising and falling too fast, his hands curling into fists at his sides. His entire body vibrated with the force of his anger, with the unbearable weight of knowing that everything had been taken from him, and that she was the reason why. That's not how this is going to go, he muttered. Angela sighed, shaking her head. Then I guess you really are as predictable as I thought. Daniels's temper snapped like a live wire. Daniels lunged at her with all the force of a man who had been waiting for this moment, who had let his anger build to the point of no return, who had convinced himself that the only way to take back what he had lost was to break her down first. Angela had already read him long before the first swing. His movements were sloppy, fueled by rage rather than skill, the kind of attack that came from someone who had spent years relying on intimidation and brute strength rather than refined technique. She sidestepped effortlessly, her stance shifting as his fist cut through empty air, the force of his own momentum carrying him forward in a way that left him momentarily exposed. She could have ended it right there. One sharp strike to his exposed ribs, a calculated elbow to his throat, a single well-placed kick to his knee would have sent him crumbling. But this wasn't about just stopping him. This was about making sure he understood. Daniels barely had time to recover before he came at her again, his frustration compounding with every failed attempt, his movements becoming more erratic. His second swing came in wilder than the first, aimed at her jaw, reckless and desperate. Angela ducked just beneath it, shifting to his side before he could readjust, her elbow snapping forward and slamming into his ribs with enough force to make him stumble. He let out a sharp grunt, his breath hitching from the impact, but it wasn't enough to stop him. If anything, it only made him angrier. "You!" he snarled, spinning to face her again, his teeth bared like a caged animal. "Think you're so damn superior, don't you?" Angela didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had already taken his measure, had already seen exactly what he was. A man out of his depth. Daniels charged again, this time lowering his stance, trying to tackle her. He thought he could use his weight against her, thought if he got close enough, he could take her down by sheer force alone. It was a mistake. Angela waited until the last second, let him commit fully, and then shifted her weight, twisting sharply as she hooked her foot behind his leg. Using his own momentum against him, Daniels hit the ground hard. The impact sent a shock wave through him, his back slamming against the pavement, air leaving his lungs in a choked gasp. He had expected to be on top, to have her pinned, but instead, he was the one sprawled across the asphalt, disoriented, his mind scrambling to keep up with what had just happened. Angela took a step back, not out of hesitation, but to give him the illusion of recovery. She could end it here, could press her knee against his chest, could knock him out cold with a single precise strike. But that wasn't enough. Daniels needed to feel every single second of this loss. He coughed, rolling onto his hands and knees, his breath ragged as he pushed himself up. His face was twisted in something between rage and disbelief, as if his brain couldn't fully process what his body was experiencing. Angela tilted her head slightly. "Are you finished?" The question landed like a slap, cutting deeper than any physical strike ever could. Daniels's hands curled into fists, his knuckles scraped from hitting the ground. But he wasn't ready to accept defeat. Not yet. With a guttural growl, he lunged again, this time feinting to the left before swinging his right fist toward her ribs. It was smarter than his earlier attacks, but still too slow. Angela caught his wrist mid-swing, twisting it with an efficiency that sent a sharp jolt of pain up his arm, forcing him to his knees before he could even process what had happened. His body followed the motion instinctively, trying to relieve the pressure, but she didn't let go. She leaned in, her voice low, unshaken. "You don't know when to quit, do you?" Daniels gritted his teeth, his free hand reaching for her, still trying to fight. Angela let out a slow breath. She was done letting him dictate this. With a calculated pivot, she yanked his trapped arm forward while sweeping his leg out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement a second time, harder than before. His head bounced against the ground, his vision momentarily blurring from the impact. Angela stepped back, watching him struggle, watching the slow, dawning realization creep into his expression. He was losing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound between them the harsh rhythm of his breathing as he lay there, staring up at the sky like he was trying to convince himself that this wasn't happening. Angela didn't move, didn't press forward. She knew he would come at her again. She had already seen it in him. He wasn't done. No matter how much his body was failing him, no matter how obvious it was that this was a fight he couldn't win, he would rather destroy himself than admit defeat. And so, she waited. Daniels groaned, his head tilting slightly, his gaze unfocused, but still laced with anger. He rolled onto his side, then his hands, pushing himself up once more. He should have stayed down. Angela exhaled, rolling her shoulders, readying herself for the next round. She had given him every opportunity to stop. Now, she would end it. Daniels spat blood onto the pavement, his body racked with exhaustion, yet his pride still demanded he keep fighting. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up, his breath coming in harsh, ragged pulls, but Angela could see it in his eyes. He still wasn't ready to accept the reality of this loss. Angela rolled her shoulders, her stance unwavering as she watched him. He was slower now, his movements no longer fueled by raw aggression, but by desperation, the dawning understanding that the power he thought he held was slipping away completely. "Stay down, Daniels," she said, her voice level, calm, almost a warning. But Daniels wasn't a man who knew when to stop. He growled through gritted teeth, forcing himself upright, his hands clenching into fists that barely had the strength to hold their shape. His pride wouldn't let him stay on the ground. His mind refused to process that he was losing, that he had already lost. With a snarl of rage, he lunged again, swinging wild and hard, putting everything he had left into one desperate attempt to take her down. Angela moved to counter, But this time, he caught her. His fist collided with her ribs, the impact sending a shockwave of pain through her side. She grunted, her body instinctively tensing against the hit, but she refused to give him the reaction he wanted. Daniels saw his opening and swung again, this time clipping her jaw hard enough to send a jolt through her skull. But Angela had been hit before. She had been in real fights. Fights that didn't leave room for hesitation. Fights where hesitation meant death. Daniels had no idea what kind of storm he had just invited. Angela took a step back, shaking off the sting, her jaw tightening. If he wanted to draw this out, she would let him. But it would only make his defeat that much more unbearable. He charged again, reckless, thinking he had a second wind, thinking that those 2 hits meant he was turning this fight around. He was wrong. Angela sidestepped sharply, cutting to his flank, and before he could adjust, she hooked her arm around his throat, yanking him backward into a brutal chokehold. Daniels choked on his own breath, his hands immediately clawing at her arm, struggling against the iron grip that locked around his throat. He bucked, tried to twist out of it, but Angela tightened the hold, locking her legs around his waist, forcing him down. His entire body jerked, panic setting in as his air supply was cut off. His fingers scrambled against her arm, trying to pry her off, his movements becoming more erratic, more desperate with each passing second. Angela kept her hold steady. "It's over, Daniels," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "You're done." Daniels refused to accept it. He thrashed, his feet kicking against the pavement, his nails digging into her skin, trying anything to break free. Angela didn't loosen her grip. She didn't let go. Daniel's movements became slower, weaker, his gasps turning into shallow, ragged noises. His pride had carried him this far. But pride didn't matter when your body was shutting down, when your lungs were screaming for oxygen, when the world around you was starting to fade. His hands, once filled with fight, began to shake. His legs, once kicking wildly, went still. And then, finally, the moment she had been waiting for. Daniels let out a strangled, broken sound, the last remnants of his pride slipping away. He couldn't win. He couldn't fight anymore. And he knew it. His voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please." Angela didn't move. "What was that?" Daniels whimpered, his body completely giving up, his breath hitching with humiliation. "Please, let me go." Angela held the choke for just a few more seconds, letting him sit in his own complete and utter failure before finally releasing him. She shoved him forward, his body crumpling onto the pavement, coughing violently as air rushed back into his lungs. Daniels lay there, gasping, humiliated, shaking. Angela pushed herself up, rolling her shoulders, ignoring the dull ache in her ribs and jaw. She had taken a few hits, but compared to what he had just endured, it was nothing. Daniels coughed, his hands pressing against the ground, his entire body trembling from the exertion. But Angela saw something else in his eyes now. Something new. For the first time, he looked afraid, not just of her, of what he had become. She took a step forward, watching the way he flinched, how his entire body tensed like he expected another strike, expected more punishment. But she didn't hit him. She just looked at him. "You brought this on yourself," she said quietly. "You could have walked away, Daniels. You could have moved on, but you didn't. And now, here you are." Daniels swallowed thickly, his throat raw, his shoulders slumped. He looked small, defeated, like the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. But then, in the silence, something shifted. Daniels's breathing evened, his fingers curling against the pavement, and before Angela could move, he sprang forward, scrambling to his feet, bolting toward his car. Angela's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just trying to escape, he was running. Not on her watch. Daniels sprinted toward his car, his body still aching, his breath uneven. But his mind was locked onto one singular goal: escape. His pride had already been shattered, his body beaten. But if he could just get in the car, if he could just get away, he could convince himself that he still had something left, that this wasn't the end. Angela, however, wasn't about to let that happen. Her muscles fired before the thought even fully formed, her feet pounding against the pavement as she launched after him, closing the distance in seconds. Daniels was fast, but he was running on pure adrenaline, his body betraying him with every faltering step. Angela, trained for endurance, for control, for the exact kind of chase he was attempting, moved like a shadow at his heels. Daniels reached his car, fingers grasping at the door handle. But before he could pull it open, Angela cut in from the side, slamming her palm against the door, forcing it shut. He barely had time to react before she pivoted, driving her elbow into his ribs with precise force. Daniels stumbled against the car, his breath exploding from his lungs in a sharp, choked gasp. His body, already battered and weakened, failed him as he sagged against the vehicle, his knees buckling for just a moment before he caught himself against the hood. Angela wasn't done. She stepped in front of him, positioning herself between him and any possible escape. Her SUV was angled just behind his sedan, boxing him in. He had nowhere to run. Daniels, still gasping, turned, his body pressing against the car as if it could somehow swallow him whole. As if there was still some way out of this, his hands curled into weak fists, his bruised knuckles trembling at his sides. Angela rolled her shoulders, completely composed, watching him with a look that made it clear she was still in control, that no amount of scrambling or desperate lunging would change how this ended. "You done running?" she asked, her voice steady. Daniels swallowed hard, his throat bobbing, his breaths still too shallow, his body still leaning too much on the car behind him for support. His silence was answer enough. Angela exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "Did you really think you'd get away, after everything?" Daniels's jaw clenched, but there was no real defiance left in his eyes. There was no victory here, no moment of triumph, no last-ditch effort that could change the outcome. Angela took a step closer, forcing him to shrink back against the metal. "You could have walked away," she said, matter of fact, almost tired. "You could have taken your loss and moved on. But you don't know how to let things go, do you?" Daniels let out a slow, ragged breath, his hands twitching like he wanted to say something, like he wanted to defend himself, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. Angela studied him for a long moment, watching the tension in his body, the subtle way he shifted his weight. Even now, even when there was nothing left, even when his own exhaustion was dragging him down like an anchor, he was still searching for something. One last move, one last opening. She sighed. "Don't," she warned. Daniels's breath hitched, his muscles tensing for half a second. Angela saw it before it even happened. He lunged, going for her in one final desperate attempt to turn the tide, but she was already moving. With a sharp, calculated motion, she sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him forward before catching him by the arm and twisting sharply, sending him crashing face first against the hood of his own car. Daniels let out a pained grunt, his cheek pressing against the heated metal, his hands pinned beneath Angela's grip. She leaned in just slightly, her voice low, unshaken. "You lost, Daniels. This is over." Daniels let out a muffled curse, his breath hitching, but there was no fight left. He lay there, his body heavy, his fingers twitching against the hood of the car, the final bitter remnants of his resistance dying out with every passing second. Angela held him there a moment longer, making sure he felt every single ounce of his failure, making sure there was no room left for delusion, for any pathetic notion that he still had a way out of this. Then, finally, she let go. Daniels slumped forward, his forehead resting against the hood of his car, his shoulders rising and falling with uneven breaths. Angela took a step back, rolling her wrists, shaking out the last of the tension that had settled in her muscles. Her ribs still ached from where he had hit her earlier, her jaw still tight from the impact. But compared to what he had just endured, it was nothing. She tilted her head slightly, watching as Daniels stayed exactly where he was, his hands limp against the metal, his entire body radiating defeat. "You really should have known better," she said, calm, steady. "Men like you always think you can do whatever you want. You think you can abuse your power, intimidate people into submission, control every situation you walk into, and for a while, you probably got away with it." She took another step back, her voice lowering, "But that ends today." Daniels didn't respond. He just sat there, broken and humiliated, the weight of reality finally crashing down on him. Daniels didn't move. He remained slumped against the hood of his car, his hands splayed weakly against the heated metal, his shoulders rising and falling in uneven breaths. The fight had drained him, left him with nothing but the weight of his own mistakes pressing down on him like an anchor, suffocating in its finality. Angela took a slow, measured breath, letting the moment stretch just long enough for the reality of it all to fully sink in. Then, with the same calm efficiency she had maintained throughout the entire encounter, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved smoothly over the screen as she dialed, her voice steady, unshaken, when the line clicked open. "This is Colonel Angela Carter," she said, her tone sharp and professional, the authority in her voice unmistakable. "I need officers dispatched to my location immediately. I am reporting an assault and attempted vehicular homicide. The suspect is restrained and currently non-compliant." Daniels stiffened. For the first time since the fight had ended, he moved, just barely. A flinch, a tensing of his jaw, the last remnants of whatever delusion he had left crumbling into dust. Angela ignored him, speaking clearly into the phone as she relayed the necessary details, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation. "Yes," she continued, her voice unwavering. "The suspect is an officer, Daniels." "Yes, that Daniels. I'll give my full statement upon arrival. Have them come prepared." She ended the call, slipping the phone back into her pocket, her movements deliberate, unrushed. Daniels shifted against the car, his knuckles pressing harder into the hood, his breathing now more erratic. He wasn't just humiliated anymore, he was panicking. "Wait," he croaked, his voice rough, the desperation finally breaking through. Angela tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Daniels swallowed, his throat working around the words, his pride still trying to hold on to something. "Anything. You don't have to do this," he rasped, turning his head just enough to look at her from the corner of his eye. "You already won," Angela exhaled, unimpressed. "And what exactly do you think happens next, Daniels?" His lips parted, but nothing came out, because even now, even after everything, he still hadn't accepted the full reality of his situation. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You came after me. You tried to run me off the road. You attacked me. You escalated until this was the only way it could end. And now, because you couldn't control yourself, you're going to face the consequences." Daniel shook his head, his breaths coming faster, more uneven. "You don't have to—" Angela cut him off. "No, you don't get to beg now." That silenced him. The truth settled in his expression like a slow-moving poison, spreading through his already broken body. He had thought he could regain control, thought that if he could just overpower her, he could erase what had happened at the station, could somehow rewrite the story in a way that put him back on top. But instead, he had cemented his own downfall. The sound of distant sirens began to rise in the still air, the unmistakable wail cutting through the morning quiet. Daniels's jaw tightened, his hands twitched. Angela saw the moment the last bit of resistance bled out of him. He wasn't just physically beaten. He was finished. The sirens grew louder, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting against the glossy surface of his car as 3 patrol vehicles pulled onto the empty stretch of road. The officers moved quickly, the tires grinding against the pavement as doors swung open. Angela stepped back, her hands relaxed at her sides, making sure there was no ambiguity when they saw the scene. She didn't need to justify herself. The damage spoke for itself. One of the officers, A middle-aged sergeant with sharp, assessing eyes strode forward, his gaze shifting between Angela and Daniels before settling on her with a flicker of recognition. "Colonel Carter," he greeted, professional but alert. "Dispatch said this was serious." Angela nodded once. "It is." She motioned toward Daniels, who was still slumped against his car, eyes burning with silent, helpless rage. "This man," she said evenly, "attacked me. He attempted to run me off the road. He pursued me with clear intent to cause harm. I defended myself, detained him, and now he's yours." The officer's eyes darkened as he turned toward Daniels, finally processing just who they were dealing with. Daniels barely lifted his head, his teeth grinding together, his entire body tense. "Is that so?" the sergeant murmured, tilting his head. His voice was almost mocking, but the disdain in his eyes was clear. He turned, gesturing to his men. "Cuff him!" Two officers stepped forward without hesitation. Daniels jerked instinctively, his body stiffening as they grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back, snapping the cuffs into place with a sharp metallic click. He winced, his breath catching, but he didn't fight them. Angela watched, unreadable, as the officers pulled Daniels upright, his posture no longer one of authority, no longer even one of defiance. He looked smaller now, shrunken under the weight of everything he had lost. "Daniels," the sergeant mused, shaking his head. "Man, you really screwed yourself, huh?" Daniels didn't answer. Angela didn't look away. One of the officers nudged him forward, leading him toward the patrol car. But just before he was forced inside, Daniels's head lifted slightly, his gaze locking onto Angela one last time, and in that moment, she saw it. The hate was still there, buried beneath his bruised and battered pride. But now it was joined by something else. Fear. Angela held his stare, her voice even, final. "You did this to yourself," she said simply. The door slammed shut. The patrol vehicle pulled away, taking Daniels with it. Angela exhaled, rolling her shoulders as the remaining officers gathered their statements, confirming the details of what had transpired. She gave them everything they needed. Clear, professional, undeniable. There would be no loopholes, no technicalities. Daniels wasn't walking away from this. By the time it was all over, and the officers had begun to clear the scene, the sergeant turned back toward her, his expression shifting just slightly. "You're good?" he asked. More of a quiet acknowledgement than a question. Angela nodded. "I will be." She turned, heading toward her SUV. The weight of the past finally lifted. Daniels had thought this was a fight about control, but what he had never understood was that he had already lost before he ever stepped onto the battlefield. And now, he would spend the rest of his life paying for that mistake. Angela had no intention of letting Daniels slip through the cracks of a flawed system, no intention of allowing him to quietly disappear without answering for what he had done. Men like him, men who abused their positions, who used authority as a weapon rather than a responsibility, had gotten away with too much for too long. She wasn't just going to hold him accountable. She was going to make sure he could never wield power over anyone again. The process started the moment she walked out of the police station after giving her full statement. The officers had been professional, some even apologetic. But she knew how these things worked. A man like Daniels had connections. There were people in that department who had likely covered for him before, people who might still be willing to vouch for him, to twist the narrative, to turn this into something it wasn't. She wasn't about to let that happen. Angela pulled out her phone and made two critical calls. The first was to her lawyer. She had no doubt that Daniels would try to paint himself as the victim, that he would spin the story however he could to avoid accountability. She needed to be ahead of him. She needed airtight charges that couldn't be dismissed, a legal case so solid that no department, no union, no sympathetic friend on the force would be able to shield him from it. She pressed charges for assault, attempted vehicular homicide, and reckless endangerment. She documented every detail, provided the officers with the dashcam footage from her SUV, ensuring that no part of this was left to interpretation. The moment Daniels tried to plead his case, There would be hard evidence waiting to shut him down. The second call was to a journalist she trusted. The story needed to be told. Not just what had happened to her, but everything Daniels had done over the years, everything that had been swept under the rug. Angela knew how to pull the right strings, how to use her influence in ways that couldn't be ignored. She made sure her account of what happened was on record, on the air, and in front of the public. And once the story broke, it didn't stop. Within hours, Daniels' name was plastered across every major news outlet. Police officer under investigation for attempted vehicular assault on U.S. Army colonel. Formerly disciplined officer faces serious charges. History of complaints uncovered. Did the system protect a repeat offender? An examination of Daniels' record. Angela hadn't needed to say much. The facts spoke for themselves. It turned out Daniels had a history, a long one. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation tactics, all things that had been buried beneath bureaucracy, dismissed with weak internal reviews, hidden behind departmental silence. But this time, he wasn't getting a quiet transfer. He wasn't getting a second chance. The internal review opened almost immediately. Officers who had once turned a blind eye were now scrambling to distance themselves, suddenly eager to cooperate, suddenly concerned about departmental integrity. Daniels was suspended indefinitely while the investigation continued. But Angela already knew how it would end. With public pressure mounting, with his past being dragged into the light, and with criminal charges stacking up against him, there was no saving his career. By the end of the week, his termination was official. By the end of the month, his trial date was set. Angela didn't celebrate when she got the confirmation. She didn't need to. This wasn't about victory. It was about justice, about ensuring that men like Daniels could never use their badges as weapons again. When the final announcement came through, the department's formal statement confirming that Daniels was no longer an officer, Angela simply exhaled, the weight of it settling over her in quiet finality. She had done what needed to be done. And Daniels? He had finally lost everything. Angela knew that justice wasn't just about pressing charges and walking away. Knowing Daniels would serve his sentence, it wasn't enough to simply see his name smeared across headlines or to hear about his termination from the force. She understood that a man like him, even after facing consequences, would search for another way back in, whether it was through private security, consulting, or some backdoor loophole that allowed him to retain even a fraction of the power he had abused for years. She had seen it happen before. Officers disgraced in one department, only to resurface in another under the right political climate. Their records conveniently overlooked. Their histories rewritten by the people who wanted to believe they had been wronged. That wasn't going to happen here. Angela filed a civil lawsuit against him, ensuring that whatever came next, he would face financial ruin alongside his already irreparable reputation. The injuries she sustained during his attack, her bruised ribs, the swelling in her jaw from where he had landed his desperate punches, were enough to justify damages in court. And that was only the beginning. Her vehicle, though still operational, had taken serious damage from his reckless pursuit, further proving his intent to harm and destroy rather than serve and protect. But this lawsuit wasn't just about the physical toll. It was about ensuring Daniels had nothing left to rebuild from. With the weight of a legal judgment hanging over his head, no police department, no security firm, no federal agency would ever dare employ him again. If there was even the slimmest possibility that he might worm his way into another position of authority, she would make sure the lawsuit followed him like a scarlet letter, a permanent stain that could not be erased. And as expected, the moment news of her lawsuit broke, the entire community reacted. The fallout was immediate and explosive, sparking a firestorm of debates and heated opinions from every corner of the city. People chose sides, argued, fought, exposed their biases, as stories like this always did, bringing out the best and worst in the public. Some called her a hero. There were those who saw the truth for what it was, who recognized Daniels for the predator he had always been, who understood that had she been anyone else, someone without her rank, without her training, without her resources, the outcome would have been entirely different. She was praised for standing her ground, for refusing to let a man with a badge use it as a weapon against her, for ensuring that Daniels didn't just lose his job, he lost the ability to ever do this again to anyone else. But then, there were the others. The ones who refused to believe she had acted in self-defense. The ones who insisted Daniels had been set up. The ones who took to online forums, news comment sections, and social media platforms, spewing the same tired rhetoric that always surfaced in cases like this. She should have just complied. He was just doing his job. The media always goes after good cops. Another officer sacrificed because of political pressure. Women like her think they can get away with anything. None of it surprised Angela. She had expected it. She had seen how the world responded to men like Daniels when they were finally held accountable. There was always a segment of the population willing to ignore the evidence, willing to twist the story into something more comfortable, something that allowed them to cling to their deeply ingrained biases rather than accept the facts. But none of it affected her. She had spent years in war zones. She had walked through places where life and death were separated by mere seconds, where every decision carried real, lasting consequences. The opinions of people who had never fought for anything, who had never stood for anything more than their own manufactured outrage, meant nothing to her. Angela didn't entertain their arguments. She didn't sit for interviews. She didn't engage in the debates. She let the facts speak for themselves. Daniels had hunted her. He had attempted to run her off the road. He had attacked her with full intent to inflict harm, possibly even kill her. And when it had come down to a fight, when there was no badge left to protect him, when he was forced to stand on his own against someone stronger, more disciplined, more skilled, he had lost. That was the truth. And no matter how many people tried to spin it, no matter how many voices screamed for his redemption, the reality remained unchanged. His name was ruined. His career was over. And now, with the lawsuit in place, with every financial and legal door slammed shut in his face, Daniels had no escape, no way to rebuild, no path back to the life he had once used as a tool for power and control. Angela continued living her life, unaffected by the noise, unshaken by the backlash, unbothered by the people who had chosen to make this a fight about ideology rather than the facts. She had done what needed to be done, not for recognition, not for applause, not for any personal satisfaction, but because it was right. Daniels had believed this was about power, but real power had never belonged to him. And now, after everything, he finally understood that. The day of the trial arrived with the weight of inevitability. For weeks, the city had been buzzing with anticipation, with every major news outlet covering the downfall of the once protected officer now facing serious criminal charges. The courtroom was packed, the tension thick, as people watched with sharp, unblinking focus, waiting to see if the system would truly hold one of its own accountable. Angela walked in with the same unwavering confidence she had carried since the moment this all began. She wasn't here for spectacle. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here because justice demanded it. At the defendant's table, Daniels sat with his legal team, his expression hardened, defiant. He still believed he could beat this, still believed that somehow, in some way, he could walk out of this unscathed. There was no regret in his eyes, no humility, only a man who still thought he had been wronged. Angela exhaled slowly as she took her seat near the front, her posture straight, composed, as the prosecution began its opening statements. The evidence against Daniels was damning. The dashcam footage played first, showing every critical moment: the illegal stop, the aggressive escalation, the chase, and finally, the brutal fight. The court watched as Daniels tried to force her off the road, as he lunged at her with unchecked fury, as he lost control, not just of the situation, but of himself. Then came the witness statements from fellow officers, some who had once defended him, now forced to admit the undeniable truth. Internal Affairs had conducted its investigation, unearthing years of misconduct, and suddenly, those who had once shielded him were desperate to distance themselves. When the prosecution called Angela to the stand, she rose without hesitation, walking forward with measured steps, her eyes focused ahead. As she took her seat, she could feel the weight of Daniels's stare. He was watching her, studying her, searching for something, a weakness, a hesitation, a sign that he could twist the narrative. He would find none. The prosecutor approached, his voice clear, steady. "Colonel Carter, can you describe the events of the morning in question?" Angela inhaled slowly, ensuring her voice was calm, professional, and controlled. "I was driving to work, using my usual route, when I noticed flashing lights behind me. I pulled over, as I have always done when stopped by law enforcement, but it became immediately clear that Officer Daniels had no legal reason for stopping me." The prosecutor nodded, pacing slightly in front of the jury. "How did you come to that conclusion?" Angela didn't hesitate. "Because I asked him directly why I was being stopped, and he failed to provide a legitimate answer. Instead, he immediately questioned whether I was in the military, doubted my rank when I told him I was a colonel, and began escalating the situation unnecessarily." The prosecutor turned to the jury, letting her words sink in. Then he turned back to her. "Did you have any reason to believe that this was a routine traffic stop?" Angela's gaze didn't waver. "No. And why is that?" "Because he treated me like a suspect the moment he saw me," she stated plainly. "It wasn't about law enforcement. It was about power. And when I didn't give him the reaction he expected, he pushed harder." Daniels shifted at the defense table, his fingers curling into fists, his jaw tight. He hated hearing this. He hated that she was dismantling him piece by piece in front of everyone. The prosecutor nodded, moving to the next part of the case. "At what point did the situation escalate beyond verbal confrontation?" Angela exhaled slightly, recalling the moment vividly. "When he demanded I exit the vehicle without cause. I asserted my rights, refusing to comply without a legitimate reason, and he immediately threatened me with arrest. It was clear that his intention was to intimidate me into submission. And when that didn't work?" Angela's eyes flickered toward Daniels for the briefest moment before returning to the prosecutor. "He called for backup, and then proceeded to conduct an unlawful search of my vehicle, rifling through my belongings, looking for anything he could use to justify his actions. When he found nothing, he still refused to let me leave. He wanted control. That was all this ever was." The prosecutor let the moment linger before continuing. "And then later, after the incident was reported, and he was suspended, what happened?" Angela kept her expression neutral, but inside, she felt the weight of the memory settle over her. "He found me again," she said, her voice even. "He used his personal vehicle to follow me, to corner me on an empty road, and then attempted to run me off the highway." "Would you say he was attempting to harm you?" Angela tilted her head slightly. "I would say he was attempting to kill me." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniels's legal team shifted uncomfortably, while he stared daggers into her, his entire body stiff with anger. The prosecutor nodded, as if expecting the answer. "And when you were forced to defend yourself, what was his response?" Angela let out a slow breath. "He didn't stop. Even after it was clear he couldn't win, even after I gave him multiple opportunities to walk away, he refused. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for control. And when I took that away, when I left him no choice but to face the reality of his actions, he did what men like him always do." The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" Angela finally turned her head fully, looking straight at Daniels as she answered. "He ran." Daniels' face darkened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. It was the first time she had acknowledged him directly, and it hit him like a slap to the face. The prosecutor nodded, turning back to the judge. "No further questions." Angela stepped down from the witness stand, her movements measured, composed, unshaken. As she took her seat again, she didn't glance in Daniels's direction. He wasn't worth the energy. The trial stretched on, but the damage had already been done. His past had been exposed. His actions had been laid bare. His credibility was in shambles. The courtroom felt heavier now, thick with a tension that pressed against the walls, as if the very air had absorbed the weight of everything that had been revealed. The trial had lasted for days, but in reality, Daniels had lost long before the jury had been sent to deliberate. His past had been unraveled thread by thread. Each incident of racial profiling, each use of excessive force, each complaint that had been buried by his superiors, all of it dragged into the light, all of it undeniable. And yet, he sat there, rigid, unyielding, refusing to break. The judge, an older man with sharp, calculating eyes, adjusted his glasses as he prepared to deliver the final sentence. He glanced over at the defense table, his expression unreadable. "Before we proceed," the judge said, voice calm but firm, "the court will allow the defendant to make a statement." The room shifted. A murmur rippled through the audience. The anticipation was thick, because this was it, Daniel's last chance to explain himself, to take responsibility, to show even the slightest acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. Angela didn't react. She simply folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Daniel stood slowly, straightening his jacket, his posture stiff, his jaw locked. He looked out at the room, at the faces staring back at him, at the jury that had already condemned him, at the press in the back row, eager to capture his downfall. For the first time since the trial began, he finally spoke. "I was doing my job." The words hung in the air for a moment, as if he expected them to carry more weight than they did. Angela remained still, watching, listening. Daniels exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the sides of the defense table, his knuckles white with tension. "You can sit here and say whatever you want about me. You can bring up every complaint, every so-called investigation, every time some civilian thought I was too aggressive, too forceful, too quick to act." He paused, shaking his head, his voice hardening. "But none of you have ever worn this badge. None of you know what it's like out there." There it was. Angela could feel the quiet shift in the room, the way the jury members exchanged glances, the way the prosecutor sat back slightly, letting Daniels bury himself deeper. Daniels took a slow breath, his voice growing more strained. "Every day, I put on that uniform and walked into the unknown, never knowing if I'd make it back home. Every stop, every call, every encounter could be the one that ended my life. And you expect me to hesitate? You expect me to second-guess my instincts?" His eyes flickered toward Angela for just a second, before snapping back to the judge. "I saw a situation, and I handled it the way I was trained to. You think I'm the only one who would have done what I did? You think any other cop wouldn't have done the same?" Angela remained expressionless, but inside she recognized his words for exactly what they were, an admission wrapped in defiance. Daniels wasn't apologizing. He wasn't showing remorse. He was justifying. The problem was, no one in that room was buying it anymore. The judge took a moment before speaking, as if giving Daniels space to realize his mistake, as if waiting for him to understand that he had just made things worse for himself. "You claim you were just doing your job," the judge said, voice measured, deliberate. "And yet, the evidence presented in this courtroom shows a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond law enforcement. What we have seen here is not the result of instinct or training, but a willful abuse of power." Daniel's jaw ticked, but he remained silent. The judge continued, "You acted not out of necessity, but out of personal resentment. You did not pursue Colonel Carter because she posed a threat. You pursued her because she did not submit to you in the way you expected. You did not arrest her because she was guilty of a crime. You arrested her because you could not tolerate a black woman, let alone a decorated military officer, challenging your authority." A ripple of reaction coursed through the courtroom, the air shifting with the finality of the statement. Daniels stood still, his shoulders squared, but there was no more fire in his eyes, only the dull flicker of a man finally realizing that he had lost. The judge looked directly at him now. "You have displayed no remorse, no willingness to acknowledge the harm you have caused, and no understanding of the abuse of power that led you here today. Given the gravity of your actions, this court finds it necessary to impose a maximum sentence." Daniels inhaled sharply, his chest rising, his fingers gripping the table like he was trying to physically hold on to whatever control he still thought he had. Angela watched him without emotion. She had known this moment would come, had known that no matter how much he tried to resist it, Daniels would face the consequences of his choices. The judge's voice was firm as he delivered the sentence. "Mr. Daniels, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for attempted vehicular homicide, aggravated assault, and abuse of power under the color of law. You will be stripped of any law enforcement privileges, and you will no longer be eligible to serve in any official capacity in any government or security role upon your release." Daniels's entire body went still, his breath catching in his throat as the weight of the judge's words settled over him like a crushing force. 15 years, the number echoed in his head, louder than the murmurs rippling through the courtroom, louder than the sound of his own pulse hammering against his skull. The final blow had landed, not just in the sentence itself, but in the absolute finality of it. There was no escape. The sharp crack of the gavel against the wood rang through the silence, sealing his fate in a single decisive moment. Within seconds, the bailiffs moved in, stepping to either side of him, their hands firm as they prepared to take him away. There was no ceremony to it, no hesitation. It was just another part of the process, another convicted man being escorted to his future behind bars. Daniels turned his head, his movements slow, deliberate, as if his body were struggling to keep up with the reality unfolding around him. His gaze locked onto Angela, and for the first time, the fire that had burned behind his eyes, the arrogance, the rage, the unwavering belief in his own superiority, was gone. What replaced it was something deeper, something darker, something hollow. Angela met his stare, but not with triumph, not with satisfaction, not with anything resembling victory. She didn't need to gloat. There was nothing left to prove. He had done this to himself. His lips parted slightly, his throat working as if he wanted to speak, as if he had something left to say. One last argument, one last excuse, one last desperate grasp for control. But no one was listening. The bailiffs pulled him back, their grip firm, their movements efficient. His hands were cuffed, his shoulders hunched, his steps dragging as they guided him toward the exit. Whatever future he had once envisioned for himself, whatever power he had once held, whatever authority he had once wielded, was gone. Angela rose from her seat, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of it all settle into her chest. She had spent months fighting for this moment, for accountability, for the kind of justice that men like Daniels had evaded for too long. And now, it was done. As she took her first step toward the doors, the noise of the courtroom faded behind her. The case was over, the verdict rendered, the sentence final. For the first time since this all began, she could finally walk away. Daniels sat in the cold, sterile holding cell, his back pressed against the unforgiving metal bench, his wrists sore from the pressure of the handcuffs that had only recently been removed. The walls around him felt smaller than they should have, as though they were slowly closing in, suffocating him with the weight of everything that had led him to this moment. It had all happened so quickly. The verdict, the gavel's sharp crack against the wood, the murmurs of satisfaction from the gallery, and the feel of the bailiff's hands gripping his arms as they led him away. He had heard every sound, every movement, but none of it had seemed real until now, until the silence pressed against his skin, until there was nothing left to distract him from the truth. For years, he had convinced himself that men like him didn't lose. The system had always protected him, had shielded him from consequences, had assured him that no matter how many complaints were filed, no matter how many times he crossed the line, there would always be someone willing to look the other way. It was how things had always been, how they were supposed to be. But that illusion had shattered the moment he was forced into that chair and told to listen to people like her, Angela Carter. He had believed that by the time this was over, she would be the one humiliated, the one questioning whether she had overstepped, the one forced to justify herself under the scrutiny of a system designed to favor men like him. He had thought he could twist the truth, manipulate the narrative, cast doubt where there should have been none. But no matter how many times he tried to frame himself as the real victim, the facts had crushed him beneath their weight, leaving him exposed for what he truly was. His fingers curled against his knee, his nails digging into the fabric of his jumpsuit, as his mind circled around the same unrelenting thought. How had it come to this? He had known better than anyone how the game was played, had seen countless others slip through the cracks, had watched as officers far worse than him had simply been reassigned, their records scrubbed clean. But somehow, he had not only been caught, he had been made an example of. His career, his reputation, his life as he had known it had been ripped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. His career, his reputation, his life as he had known it, had been ripped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. The more he thought about it, the more his stomach twisted, burning with resentment, with the deep, gnawing feeling that this wasn't supposed to happen to him. If Carter had just backed down that day, if she had just done what he expected her to, if she had just swallowed her pride and shown him the respect he deserved, none of this would have happened. She had humiliated him back then, had stripped him of his authority, had challenged him in a way that no one ever had before. And even now, even after everything, even knowing that he was the one sitting in this cell, preparing for a future behind bars, he still hated her for it. But hatred wouldn't change anything. Angela Carter had won, and he had lost. No matter how many times he replayed the events in his head, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that the system had turned against him, he could no longer deny the truth that had been staring him in the face all along. He had been wrong. He had let his own arrogance, his own misplaced sense of superiority, drive him into making one mistake after another, each one worse than the last, each one sealing his fate a little more until there was no way out. And now it was too late to undo any of it. As he stared at the gray walls in front of him, the weight of his choices crushing him from the inside out, he finally understood what it meant to be powerless. Angela stood at the courthouse steps, her gaze drifting across the cityscape as she allowed herself a rare, measured breath of relief. The trial had concluded. The fight was over, and justice had finally been served. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been forced to endure what men like Daniels had inflicted on them. This had never been just about one case, one moment, one incident. This had been about the greater battle, the one that so many had fought before her, and the one that would continue long after today. Daniels had been held accountable, stripped of his title, his influence, and his ability to ever wield power against those beneath him again. His name, once associated with unchecked authority, was now synonymous with disgrace. The badge that he had once hidden behind, the one that had protected him for so long, had been reduced to nothing more than a reminder of everything he had lost. But even now, even knowing that he would spend years in a prison cell, Angela knew this fight would never truly be over. She had seen it before. Men like him always found supporters, always found those willing to twist the truth to fit their own narratives, always found people who would insist that he had been wronged, that he had been made an example of for no reason other than political pressure. There would be backlash. There always was. But she didn't care. She had not come this far to concern herself with the opinions of those who had no interest in the truth. What mattered was that the system had done what it was meant to do, that it had worked for once, that justice had been carried out in a way that left no room for doubt. Daniels had been given every opportunity to show remorse, to take responsibility, to acknowledge what he had done. But he had refused at every turn. His pride had been his undoing, and now he would have to live with the consequences of his own choices. Angela took a slow step forward, her posture straight, her movements unhurried, her resolve as strong as it had ever been. The road ahead would not be easy, but it never had been. She had learned long ago that change was never simple, that it was always met with resistance, that there would always be those who wanted to preserve a system that worked in their favor. But that had never stopped her before, and it wouldn't stop her now. As she reached her car, she glanced up at the sky, exhaling one last breath, letting the weight of it all settle where it needed to, no longer carrying it with her. The fight wasn't over, but she had won this battle, and for now, that was enough. Angela had never been the type to seek recognition. She had spent years in the military, serving with discipline and focus, never expecting applause, never chasing accolades. She had done what needed to be done because it was right. Not because she wanted to be celebrated for it, but in the weeks following the trial, as the media storm gradually died down, the recognition found her anyway. The Pentagon issued a formal statement commending her professionalism, highlighting the way she had carried herself throughout the ordeal. She had faced an injustice and handled it with composure, refusing to let emotion cloud her judgment, refusing to let the situation spiral into something more volatile. The military community, which had followed the case with a vested interest, took note of how she had not only defended herself, but had done so while upholding the integrity of her uniform. She had not been reckless. She had not been careless. She had followed protocol and taken every necessary step to ensure that the system worked as it should. Her commanding officers reached out personally, expressing their respect, some even telling her that what she had done would serve as an example for others. She had not just fought for herself. She had fought against an abuse of power that had gone unchecked for too long, and she had won. Still, for Angela, the real victory was not in the headlines that called her a testament to discipline and justice, or in the messages of support that poured in from people she had never met. The real victory was in knowing that she had stood her ground and refused to let a man like Daniels walk away from what he had done. She returned to duty as if nothing had changed. Her uniform still fit the same, her posture remained upright, her voice held the same unwavering authority. But in truth, she was sharper now, more certain than ever that some battles were worth fighting. She did not speak of Daniels unless directly asked, and even then her answers were short and final. There was nothing more to say. She had done what was necessary, and he had been left to deal with the consequences of his own choices. While Angela moved forward, Daniels remained trapped in the wreckage of his own making. The media coverage had been relentless. His name had become synonymous with disgrace, his career obliterated, his reputation beyond repair. No police department would ever touch him again. No private security firm. No consulting job. No government contract. His record was now a permanent stain, one that no amount of favors or connections could wash away. The officers who had once laughed at his jokes, who had stood beside him, unquestioning, had all distanced themselves. The department had made it clear that he was an embarrassment, a liability they had been forced to cut loose in order to preserve their own image. No one defended him. No one pitied him. For years he had been protected, shielded from the consequences of his own misconduct, assured that no matter how many complaints were filed, he would always have a way out. But that safety net had disappeared the moment he chose to escalate things beyond his control. He had thought himself untouchable. He had believed that a woman like Angela Carter would never have the power to challenge him. And yet, she had. Now, his world was nothing more than a cell. 4 walls that held nothing for him but time. Time to sit in silence. Time to think. Time to replay every moment that had led him to this place, to this fate, to this inescapable reality. He had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his future. His name had become a cautionary tale, spoken in hushed tones among officers who had once considered him their own. Angela sat at her desk, flipping through mission reports, listening to the steady hum of activity outside her office. There was always another task ahead, always another assignment waiting. The world had not stopped because of what had happened, and neither had she. The fight had been exhausting, the battle longer than it should have been, but justice had been served. She had seen firsthand what unchecked power could do, what happened when people believed themselves above the law. Daniels had worn his badge as if it had given him dominion over others, as if it had placed him beyond the reach of accountability. He had mistaken authority for control, mistaking fear for respect, and he had believed, right up until the very end, that he would walk away untouched. But no one was untouchable. Justice had been served, not just in a courtroom, but in the undeniable reality that Daniels had lost everything. Angela had seen it through to the end, ensuring that he would never again hold power over another person. And that was enough. As she looked out the window, watching the sun stretch across the base, she let out a slow, steady breath. There was no more fight ahead, no unfinished war waiting to be won. This was the end of the road. The chapter had closed, and she was finally free to move forward. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.